I had just returned from the reading of the will and found my photo in the trash. My room was emptied, my name erased from every document, and my son toasting over the inheritance my husband left for me. They thought I'd stay quiet, but they were wrong. If you think this is just another family drama, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now and stay tuned for more haunting stories like this one. The rain hadn't stopped since morning. It came down in thin, steady sheets, painting the sky in shades of grief that matched Evelyn Carter's heart. Inside the chapel, every pew was half filled, but Evelyn barely noticed the people. Her gaze never strayed from the mahogany casket resting at the altar. Her husband Thomas lay inside, silent for the first time in their 50-year marriage. She sat in the front row, back straight out of old habit hands, trembling in her lap. A single black lace glove lay forgotten beside her. She hadn't been able to put it on. Her fingers were too stiff, too swollen with sorrow. Her silver hair, once so carefully pinned, had come loose in the misty air. But she didn't care. All she could feel was the crushing finality of the moment. Jason and Melanie arrived late as always. Jason looked like he had stepped out of a business magazine, charcoal suit, polished shoes, phone still in his hand. Melanie, tall and sharp-jawed, wore a black dress far too chic for mourning. Her heels clicked decisively on the stone floor as they walked past guests to join Evelyn, Mother Jason said, kneeling by her seat. His voice was soft, but his eyes never fully met hers. "I'm so sorry. He was a great man." Evelyn gave a small nod. She couldn't speak. Her throat was dry, her voice buried somewhere beneath the weight of grief. Melanie leaned in next. "You must be exhausted, Evelyn. You haven't eaten, have you?" "No," Evelyn murmured. "Don't worry," Melanie said, placing a hand lightly on Evelyn's shoulder. "We'll take care of you." The service went by in a blur. Words were spoken. A pastor recited verses Evelyn had heard before but couldn't feel. People hugged her, offered condolences, and then drifted off like clouds after a storm. When the chapel emptied, Evelyn stood before the casket, tracing her gloved finger over the engraved brass plate. Thomas Henry Carter, 1947-2024. She whispered his name once under her breath. Jason appeared at her side. "Mom, the car's ready." The funeral home had arranged for a driver, but Jason insisted they take her home themselves. Melanie had already dismissed the driver with a smile. The ride was quiet. Outside, the rain painted streaks down the windows, city lights blurring and passing halos. Evelyn sat in the back seat, hands in her lap, feeling like a passenger in someone else's life. Jason glanced at her in the mirror. "Are you feeling all right?" "I'm tired," she replied, staring at her own reflection. He nodded. "It's been a long day. When we get home, you should rest. We have a few things to talk about tomorrow, nothing serious." Melanie turned slightly in the front seat. "Just a few things about the house, the bills, small stuff." Evelyn didn't respond. When they pulled up to the old colonial house on Sycamore Drive, Jason jumped out first and opened the umbrella. He offered his arm to Evelyn, but she brushed him off gently. She walked slowly up the stone steps, her cane clicking softly. Inside, everything smelled of lemon polish and absence. The house had been too clean lately. Melanie had insisted on hiring a professional service weeks ago, even while Thomas was in hospice. To get ahead of things, she'd said. Now the place looked like a showroom, spotless, soulless. Evelyn walked into the living room, paused at the fireplace mantel. Thomas's favorite clock was missing. She frowned, but said nothing. Jason followed close behind. "Mother, can we sit for a minute? Just a minute." "I'm going to change," she said, beginning toward the staircase. Jason blocked her path. "Please, we need to talk tonight." Melanie emerged from the kitchen with 2 cups of chamomile tea, steam rising from the porcelain. "Let's make this easy," Melanie said, handing one to Evelyn. "You need rest and a plan." Evelyn took the cup but didn't drink, her brow furrowed. Jason cleared his throat. "We've been thinking, Mom. You shouldn't be alone right now." "Not after everything," Melanie added. "You need care support. The grief." "I'm not sick," Evelyn said sharply. It was the first time her voice held steel all day. "No, of course not," Jason said quickly. "But losing Dad was huge, and this house, it's too big, too much." Evelyn sat down slowly on the couch, teacup trembling slightly in her hand. "What are you saying?" Jason glanced at Melanie, who took over. "There's a wonderful place just outside the city," Melanie began. "It's peaceful, lots of natural light. They even do art therapy yoga. It's not a nursing home, it's a wellness community." "A place for widows," Evelyn said, the sarcasm barely veiled. "A place for healing," Melanie replied, voice calm but firm. "It's temporary, until you're back on your feet." The wind outside howled, thunder growled somewhere beyond the hills. Evelyn looked between them, her chest tightening. Jason moved closer. "We've already packed a small bag. Just a few things. We'll take you tonight, it's safer. You can come back any time, but we really think this is what's best right now." Melanie smiled. "And you don't have to worry about anything. We'll take care of the bills, the maintenance. You just focus on yourself." Evelyn's hands clenched around the teacup. "Tonight?" Jason nodded. "Yes, it's better this way. Fresh start, fresh morning." A long pause. Then Evelyn stood up slowly. "I need my coat." Jason exhaled, relieved. Melanie stood as well, already collecting her purse. Evelyn moved to the hallway closet, reached in and pulled out her dark wool coat, the one Thomas had bought her on their anniversary trip to Vermont. As she slipped it on her hand, brushed against the silk scarf he'd loved, she looped it around her neck without a word. When she turned back, Jason was already holding the umbrella, Melanie beside him at the open front door. The rain was heavier now. It slapped the pavement in rhythmic taps like fingers drumming impatiently. Evelyn stepped outside, her leather shoes crunching on wet leaves. As they approached the car, she stopped. Just for a moment. She looked back at the house. Her house. The porch light flickered slightly, casting shadows on the siding. The shutters were freshly painted, the bushes trimmed. Everything looked perfect, but it wasn't hers anymore. Not really. It had already started to slip away the moment Thomas died. Now she was just watching the final piece be taken from her. She stood there still, the rain soaking into her coat, her hair, her scarf. Jason tapped the car roof. "Mom." She didn't answer. Instead, she turned back toward the house. Her eyes searched for something, anything that felt like home. But the curtains were drawn. The windows reflected only darkness. She whispered under her breath, almost inaudibly, "Thomas, what is happening?" Then silently she slid into the back seat. The car door closed with a dull final click. Rain pelted the roof as the vehicle pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, Evelyn watched the house shrink into the storm, swallowed by shadow and distance. She didn't know where she was going. All she knew was that something had changed, something had broken, and she wasn't sure if it could ever be put back together. But deep inside, beneath the grief and confusion, a new sensation stirred quietly. Suspicion. It started as a whisper. It wouldn't stay that way for long. The gates clanged shut behind her with a hollow metallic finality. Evelyn Carter stood motionless, just inside the entrance of Meadow Pine's residence, though every inch of her body screamed to move, to turn back, to run. But the rain outside had swallowed the road behind them, and Jason's car had disappeared before she could even register the sound of his tires leaving. Inside, the smell was the first thing she noticed. Bleach and boiled peas, the kind of scent that settled into the corners of your clothes and made everything feel beige. The lobby was dimly lit with flickering fluorescent lights overhead and faded green linoleum tiles underfoot that curled at the edges. The receptionist barely glanced up. Name she asked through chipped pink acrylics. "Evelyn Carter." Her voice felt far away. The woman tapped at a keyboard, frowned. "You weren't scheduled. No paperwork, no insurance ID. My son arranged it." Evelyn turned slightly as if Jason might still be standing behind her explaining, but there was only silence. "No ID, no file." "Great." The woman sighed and handed Evelyn a clipboard. "Temporary intake. You'll get a shared room for now. Nurse Lily will show you." Evelyn took the clipboard, her hand trembling, though she couldn't say whether it was the cold or something deeper. She didn't remember signing anything. Didn't remember agreeing to be placed somewhere without warning, without even a toothbrush. Nurse Lily was young, too cheerful, and moved too fast. "You'll be in room 2B for now," she chirped. "We're short-staffed, but everyone's lovely. You'll fit right in." The hallways felt like a tunnel with no end. Fluorescent lights blinked above them. Doors lined either side, each labeled with a room number and an occasional fading nameplate. A man with milky eyes in a wheelchair watched her pass, saying nothing. Room 2B was barely more than a closet. One bed was already occupied. An elderly woman lay curled beneath scratchy hospital-grade sheets, her back to the door. The other bed, hers, was stripped bare, save for a gray wool blanket folded neatly at the foot. There's a closet here and a drawer. Dinner's at 6. Lights out by 9. You'll meet the activities director in the morning. Welcome to Meadow Pines. Lily smiled like she meant it. When Evelyn finally sat down on the bed, the mattress squeaked under her weight, like it too resented her presence. Her fingers rested on her purse, the last thing she truly owned. No documents, no jewelry. Not even her wedding ring. She'd left that on her nightstand at home, absent-mindedly thinking she'd be back before bed. She wouldn't cry, not here, not now. She didn't realize the other woman in the room had turned until she heard a voice, calm, crisp, and unexpectedly warm. "They bring you in the rain, too." Evelyn turned. The woman had bright gray eyes and an angular face that might have once been striking. Her short hair was more white than gray, cropped neatly, and her gaze was impossibly direct. "I'm sorry," Evelyn asked. "The rain," the woman said, adjusting her pillow. "They always do it in the rain. Thinks it softens the blow, I guess. Less likely the old bat will make a scene when it's wet and miserable." "I didn't make a scene." The woman smiled. "Didn't think you did. You don't strike me as the screaming type. Name's Martha. Roommate, witness, fellow hostage." "Evelyn," she replied softly. Martha gave a nod of approval. "Evelyn Carter, then. What's your crime?" Evelyn blinked. "They all say we volunteered," Martha went on. "But let me guess. You didn't pack a bag. You didn't sign a single thing. And now suddenly you're here, assigned a bed like a broken appliance." Evelyn said nothing. "That's what I thought." Martha leaned back and closed her eyes. "Don't worry. Took me 3 days to accept I'd been shelved like expired milk. Took Dolores down in 3A 2 hours. She's efficient like that." The silence stretched. Outside, rain tapped against the small window, the only one in the room. It was bolted shut. Later that evening, Evelyn found the dining hall. The food looked like it had lost a fight: grayish meat, overcooked carrots, instant mashed potatoes. She barely ate. Around her, a dozen other residents sat hunched in groups of 2 or 3, barely speaking. Some stared into space. Some stared at their trays like they expected them to disappear. Martha, seated beside her, devoured the food like it was a feast. "You eat like that every night?" Evelyn asked. Martha shrugged. "You learn, or you starve. The peas are less offensive if you smother them with whatever that gravy is pretending to be." "How long have you been here?" "Long enough to know the difference between surviving and rotting. You strike me as a survivor." "I didn't know I was coming here," Evelyn said. "Of course you didn't. They never tell us. Makes it easier." Evelyn looked down at her tray, the carrots still untouched. Martha leaned in. "I was a teacher once. Philosophy. St. Augustine said, 'The world is a book, and those who do not travel read only one page.' But no one tells you some chapters are forced on you. This is one of them." Evelyn blinked. It was the first time in days someone had spoken to her like she was a person and not a liability. Later that night, lying in bed, Evelyn stared at the ceiling. The mattress was thin. The sheets had a faint scent of bleach and resignation. But she couldn't sleep. Not with the way Jason had avoided eye contact. Not with the quickness of how it all happened. She sat up slowly, trying not to wake Martha, and fished into her purse for the little leather notebook she kept. Scraps of thoughts, old recipes, sometimes grocery lists, and there it was. On the back page, written in Thomas's handwriting, a list. A single cryptic list he had scribbled months ago. Bank security box, Herald Trust, backstep, wood. Backstep, wood. The words struck her now in a way they hadn't when she first saw them. He'd written it while recovering from surgery. She remembered asking what it meant. He just smiled. "Just tying up loose ends," he'd said. Martha stirred. "You all right over there?" Evelyn hesitated, then whispered, "My husband left something, I think. Something hidden. Something under the house." Martha sat up. Her eyes gleamed even in the dark. Now that sounds like the start of a good story. You think I'm crazy? I think Martha said slowly that no man writes wood back step unless there's a secret to it. And men, God bless them, they never hide love notes. Only things they're afraid to admit they should have told you sooner. Evelyn stared into the shadows. Do you think Jason knew? Martha snorted. Jason. The son who dropped you off like a misaddressed parcel. He knows something. Maybe not what's under that step, but he's involved. A cold knot tightened in Evelyn's stomach. Everything had happened too fast, too cleanly. Thomas's death, the immediate push to move her out the quiet way Jason took over all financial matters. She hadn't even touched their joint account in weeks. She didn't know where the deed was. She hadn't seen a single bank statement since Thomas passed. And now she was in a place where no one even asked for her ID. They buried me, Evelyn whispered. No, Martha said gently, they parked you. But you're not rusted yet. Evelyn lay back down, eyes wide open, heartbeat thrumming. Outside the window, lightning lit the sky. Inside, a storm far more dangerous had already begun. Tomorrow she would ask more questions. Tomorrow she would remember who she used to be. Tonight she stared at the ceiling and repeated one phrase under her breath. Backstep, wood. Whatever Thomas had hidden, it was still there. And it was hers. The next morning came wrapped in cold light. Evelyn lay still, staring at the ceiling as muffled footsteps shuffled past the room outside. Somewhere down the corridor a woman was humming off key haunting, and the scent of oatmeal drifted in faintly through the cracked door. But Evelyn wasn't thinking of breakfast. She was staring at a memory, not a vague impression or dream, a moment, sharp, intact, and pulsing just behind her eyes. It had been 2 weeks before Thomas died. They'd been sitting on the back porch, bundled in blankets, their legs covered with a quilt Evelyn's mother had sewn during the war. The early spring sun was low and golden, and Thomas was drinking tea with a touch of whiskey, like he always did when he didn't want to talk about the pain in his back. He hadn't said much that afternoon, just sat there watching the birds peck at the feeder. But when Evelyn leaned over to refill his cup, she caught him staring at her, not with love, not with pain, but with something else. Urgency. Tom, she asked. He blinked. The look was gone. Sorry, love, he said. Just thinking. About, he stirred the tea with the spoon eyes on the swirling liquid. About what happens when I'm gone. She reached for his hand. We'll manage. You always say I'm the strong one. His fingers tightened around hers, suddenly serious. If something happens, Evelyn, if I'm not there, you trust your instincts, you hear me. She laughed softly, brushing hair from his forehead. Always do. I mean it, he said, gripping her hand harder now. Don't let anything push you into silence. If something feels wrong, it is. You're scaring me. Then remember this, your instincts are louder than their lies. It had sounded like poetry at the time. An old man getting sentimental. But now it felt like a warning. Evelyn sat up in bed, her palms suddenly clammy. Across the room, Martha was brushing her hair, studying herself in a hand mirror that had clearly seen better years. Can I ask you something? Evelyn said. Martha didn't look away from the mirror. Is it about the food? Because I already told you that gravy is a lie. No, it's about memories. That caught Martha's attention. She lowered the brush to her lap. Go on. Have you ever remembered something and realized it meant something completely different than you thought? Martha gave a crooked smile. That's called wisdom, dear. Usually comes after a mistake. I think my husband knew something, Evelyn whispered. Martha's brows lifted. About what? I don't know, Evelyn admitted. But he told me if something didn't feel right to trust my gut. And now I think he knew Jason and Melanie would try something. Martha was quiet for a moment, then stood and crossed the room, sitting on the edge of Evelyn's bed. Tell me everything. So Evelyn did. She told her about the porch, the tea, the look in Thomas's eyes, the urgency, the phrase, your instincts are louder than their lies. When she finished, Martha nodded slowly. He was trying to leave you a trail. Evelyn looked down at her lap. There's more. In my notebook, he left a message. A strange list. It said, Bank Security Box, Harold Trust, Backstep, Wood, back. At that, something sparked in Martha's eyes. Backstep, Wood. Huh. She walked to her side of the room and opened her drawer. After digging through a collection of folded crossword puzzles and old Reader's Digests, she pulled out a piece of graph paper creased and yellowed. "What's that?" Evelyn asked. "A map," Martha replied, grinning. She handed it over. The drawing was crude but deliberate pencil marks showing a basic floor plan. Front porch, living room, kitchen. Then in bold, careful handwriting at the bottom south side back step, hollow sound, box inset under third plank. Evelyn stared at it, breath caught. "Where did you get this?" "Your husband gave it to me," Martha said, sitting back down. 6 months ago." Evelyn's heart stopped. "What?" "I was here for physical therapy," Martha explained. "A stupid hip injury. We met in the waiting room of Dr. Rowe's office. He recognized my name from some philosophy book I published in the 70s. We talked, 3 times, maybe 4. He said I reminded him of you." Evelyn blinked. "Why would he?" "He said if anything ever happened to him and you ended up here, I might be the only person crazy enough to believe you." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. "He planned this," Martha smiled. "Your man was sharp. He didn't trust Jason. Said he'd been sniffing around the finances for months." Evelyn clutched the map. The lines were smudged in places, but the message was clear. Thomas had left her a breadcrumb, a key, a truth buried under wood and time. Martha's voice softened. "You ever hear of Schrodinger's cat?" Evelyn wiped at her eyes. "The box with the cat that's both alive and dead until someone opens it." "Exactly," Martha said. "That box under your step, it's your Schrodinger's box. Could be something, could be nothing. But until you open it, your life belongs to their version of truth." Evelyn stared at the map. Her fingers tightened. "Then I'm going to open it," she whispered. Martha nodded. "Good. That's the first honest sentence I've heard you say since you got here." A silence settled between them. Outside, the rain had stopped. A rare shaft of sunlight sliced across the tile floor. But how Evelyn said quietly, "They'll never let me leave." Martha's smile returned. "Oh, honey, you're not asking the right question. It's not how you'll leave." She leaned closer, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's when." Evelyn felt her heart thud once, and then again. But this time it wasn't fear. It was adrenaline. Because for the first time since she buried Thomas, she wasn't just grieving, she was preparing. She folded the map, tucked it inside her pillowcase. Somewhere under that third plank was a truth Thomas had buried, and she was going to dig it up, even if it meant risking everything, even if it meant becoming the woman Jason never believed she still was. Not a liability, not a frail widow, but a wife, a fighter, and a mother who had been underestimated one time too many. Rain again. It started in the late afternoon, soft as mist, barely a whisper against the windows of meadow pines. By sundown it had thickened into something colder, darker, steady sheets tapping against the glass like fingers urging her to move. Evelyn Carter stood at the narrow window of room 2B, one hand resting on the sill, the other curled tightly around the folded map beneath her robe. She'd stared at the back step of her mind for days now. Third plank, hollow sound, box inset. She could hear Thomas's voice more clearly now than she had since the funeral. It played like a loop in her mind. Trust your instincts. That's exactly what she intended to do. Across the room, Martha slept soundly, or at least pretended to. The woman had developed an uncanny talent for knowing when Evelyn needed silence and when she needed to be pulled back from the brink. Tonight, Evelyn needed neither words nor warnings. She needed action. Her small duffel was already packed. Just a few essentials. The leather notebook, her ID, $52 in cash, half in coins, and a raincoat that didn't fit the way it used to. She'd found it in the facility's lost and found bin turquoise ugly but warm. The rest she'd leave behind. The hall beyond their door was quiet. Too quiet. Nurse Lily had just finished her evening rounds. Evelyn had timed them for 2 nights straight. After the 9 o'clock lights-out check, Lily rarely returned until just before 11. The hallway cameras had blind spots. Martha had shown her which ones. The front desk was usually manned by Harold, the elderly night porter, who loved crossword puzzles more than confrontation. It had to be tonight. Her heart beat steadily, surprisingly calm. Fear had already visited and gone. What remained was a clarity she hadn't felt in years. Evelyn slid on the raincoat, tucked the map into her sock, and reached for her cane. Then paused. No, not tonight. The cane would slow her down. She'd have to trust her legs one last time. At exactly 9:16 p.m. she opened the door. The hallway was dim, the overhead lights humming softly. Her slippers made almost no sound against the linoleum. She kept close to the left wall, just like Martha instructed. The camera in the corner above room 2D had a 3-second delay before motion was picked up. Evelyn counted each second beneath her breath as she slipped past. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3. Gone. At the junction, she peered around the corner. No one. The staff station down the hall flickered with the glow of an old television set. Harold's silhouette was visible through the frosted glass, hunched over his puzzle book pen bobbing. She moved quickly, past the linen closet, past the medicine cart bay, then turned right toward the emergency exit stairwell. She reached it, pressed her ear to the steel door. Nothing. Evelyn braced herself and pushed. The door shrieked open, loud and metallic. She winced, holding her breath, waiting for shouts, footsteps, anything. Silence. Then the slam of the door closing behind her. The stairwell was cold, concrete-walled and unlit. She descended one step at a time, fingers grazing the metal handrail, breath-shallow legs trembling slightly from the strain. By the time she reached the ground floor, sweat clung to the back of her neck despite the chill. The back exit was only 20 feet away. She pressed her palm against the crash bar. Locked. Damn. Evelyn looked around. A janitor's cart stood nearby, its top drawer slightly ajar. Inside, a ring of keys hung loosely gleaming like salvation. She grabbed it, sorted through hands, shaking. The 5th key fit. The lock clicked. The door gave way with a rush of wet wind that nearly knocked her back. She stepped out into the storm. The rain was merciless now. It hit her face in slanted bursts. Her coat clung to her heavy with water in seconds. The parking lot was nearly empty, just one lonely sedan under a broken lamppost. She had no phone, no way to call for help, but she had memorized the number. Evelyn trudged across the pavement, shielding her eyes, and reached the payphone mounted on the side of the maintenance shed. With trembling fingers, she inserted 4 quarters and dialed. The man who answered was half asleep. "This is Freddie's Cabs. I need a ride," she said, voice barely above the wind. "Where to?" She gave him the address. Her address. The house on Sycamore Drive. There was a pause. "Kinda late, ma'am. Storm's a bastard out here. I'll double the fare." He grunted. 15 minutes. The wait was the longest of her life. Evelyn huddled beneath the shallow overhang, rain still biting at her ankles. Thunder cracking in the distance like warning shots from God. But her grip on the duffel never loosened. When the yellow cab finally pulled up, headlights slicing the mist like swords, she nearly collapsed with relief. The driver was a young man, barely 30, with earbuds in and eyes that didn't ask questions. She climbed in wordlessly, water soaking into the seat. "You sure you want to go there this late?" he asked, punching the address into his GPS. "I'm sure," she said. They drove in silence, the wipers beating back the storm with metronomic persistence. Evelyn stared out at the city she once knew. It felt foreign now, smaller somehow, as if her old life had shrunk to a story someone else was telling. When the car finally turned onto Sycamore Drive, she caught her breath. The house stood in darkness. No lights, no car in the driveway. Jason and Melanie were gone. Thank God. She paid the driver with wet bills, muttered a thank you, and stepped out onto the curb. The rain had softened into a drizzle, now more forgiving but no less determined. The lawn was overgrown. She hadn't realized how quickly it could happen. A few weeks without her pruning hands, and nature had started to reclaim everything. She approached the back of the house, avoiding the front windows. She didn't need to see the empty mantel, the missing clock, the absence of her life. She was here for one reason: the back steps. Her shoes squelched in the mud as she rounded the side. The security light flickered but didn't turn on. Jason had always been too cheap to fix the motion sensors. She reached the steps, 3 wooden planks across the small porch just above the basement entrance. She knelt slowly, painfully, feeling each one with her palm. The 3rd plank, she tapped. Thud, thud, hollow. Her breath caught. She reached into the duffel, pulled out a small, flathead screwdriver she had tucked away from the maintenance shed 3 days earlier. Press the edge into the seam between the boards. Pried. The plank lifted. Underneath, nestled in dust and cobwebs, was a wooden box the size of a shoebox. No lock, no hinges, just a carved top with Thomas's initials burned into the surface. She pulled it free, staggered back into the shelter of the steps, opened the lid. Inside, a folded manila envelope, a cassette tape in a plastic case, and a faded photograph her and Thomas standing in front of the very same porch, arms around each other, smiling like fools. Evelyn clutched the box to her chest, rain mixing with tears on her face. He had left her something, not just secrets, not just proof, but trust, faith that she'd find it, that she'd know what to do. She stood there in the rain, eyes closed, breath slow. The storm was still there, but inside her, something had shifted, something had opened, and whatever came next, she was no longer running. She was returning. The rain had softened into a mist wrapping around the backyard like a ghost too tired to haunt. Evelyn sat under the porch awning, soaked to the bone, her knees stiff from crouching. But she didn't feel the cold anymore. Not really. Not with the wooden box resting in her lap, heavy and warm and humming with a truth she wasn't sure she was ready to face. She brushed a layer of dirt from the lid with trembling fingers. THC. Thomas Henry Carter burned into the grain with the delicate precision of a man who had once built model ships on rainy afternoons. Her husband had carved this. For her. Evelyn sucked in a breath and lifted the lid. Inside, everything was arranged with eerie exactness. A folded piece of parchment. A black leather notebook she instantly recognized Thomas's personal journal. A cassette tape. A flash drive wrapped in foil. And beneath it all, a slim envelope marked in his handwriting, "For Evelyn, only if I'm gone." She reached for the notebook, first opening to a page near the end. The handwriting was messier than usual, slanted, inconsistent, as though written through pain. March 5th. I saw Jason in the office again. He didn't know I'd come back early from the hospital. Found him digging through the filing cabinet. Told me he was looking for Mom's insurance papers. I didn't confront him. Not yet. But I've started moving things, just in case. March 7th. Melanie has changed too. The way she speaks to Evelyn, always so careful, like she's rehearsing. And she's always hovering when we talk about money. Something's coming, I can feel it. March 11th. Called Harold. Set up the trust. Transferred the secondary property into Evelyn's name, not under the main estate, just in case they contested. March 12th. Hid the documentation under the porch step. Told Martha everything. God help me, I hope she remembers. March 14th. If Evelyn's reading this, then I failed to stop them, and I'm sorry. Her hand trembled as she turned the page. There were receipts, bank statements, photocopies of wire transfers, a list of property IDs, including one she didn't recognize, West Shore Cottage, lot number 17. She pressed her palm to the page as if to still the words. Then slowly she reached for the envelope marked "For Evelyn." Inside, a single-page letter yellowing at the edges, his cursive looping gently across the paper. My dearest Evelyn, if you're holding this, then I'm gone. And if you found it, it means you already know something isn't right. I tried to fix it before I left, I swear I did. But I underestimated them. I underestimated our own son. I wanted to believe Jason was just lost, not malicious. But he's taken steps that make that impossible to ignore. He wants the house, the money, everything. And I fear that once I'm gone, he'll come for you too. I've protected what I could. The documents here, the flash drive, the trust agreement, the cottage deed, they're all legal. Harold knows everything. Don't confront them, not yet. Gather your strength. Let them believe they've won. And Evelyn, I know this isn't fair. I should have told you more. I should have said something when I first saw the signs, but I didn't want to believe it either. You are the strongest person I've ever known. Trust your instincts. I love you. Always. Tom. She folded the letter back with a reverence usually reserved for scripture. A sob welled in her throat, uninvited. She clutched the letter to her chest, her entire body folding inward around it like it could hold her together. For so long she'd questioned herself, wondered if the doubts, the unease, the pit in her stomach were just the noise of grief. But it wasn't. She had been right. They were stealing from her, manipulating her. And Thomas had known. He'd seen it coming. and in his quiet, methodical way, he had left her the tools to fight back. She wiped her tears on the sleeve of her raincoat and reached for the cassette tape. It was labeled simply, "Play Me Alone." The house was still dark. No cars in the driveway, no footsteps inside. Jason and Melanie were likely still at the hotel. She'd overheard something about a wedding venue in Napa they wanted to tour. She took the box under one arm, stood slowly, and entered the house through the back door. Inside, the air smelled like new paint and old lies. She went straight for the study. The tape player was still on the bookshelf, a dusty relic Jason had once mocked her for keeping. She slipped the cassette inside, pressed play. The tape whirred softly, then clicked. Silence. Then Thomas's voice. "Evelyn, if you're listening, I'm sorry." The sound of his breath. "I should have told you. I should have sat you down and said it out loud. But I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe Jason would come to his senses. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. I always gave him too much room. Maybe I was trying to make up for all the times I wasn't home when he was little. But I was wrong. He's not just confused. He's after the estate, after you. I heard them, Evelyn, he and Melanie, in the kitchen, talking about moving you to a place where you wouldn't get in the way. They think I was asleep." A pause, then a quiet breath. "The trust I created, the one Harold helped draft, is in your name only. The cottage up north, the account's tied to it. He can't touch them. He doesn't even know they exist. I used my mother's maiden name on the deed. Every trail leads to you, not the estate. I'm sorry I didn't prepare you for this, but I believe in you. You'll know what to do. And Evelyn, if you ever wonder whether I still loved you even at the end, remember this. I gave you everything I had left, and I trusted you to finish what I couldn't. You are not alone." The tape stopped. Evelyn sat there for a long moment, the only sound the faint tick of the clock on the wall. Her hands gripped the edge of the desk, and something inside her clicked. This wasn't about grief anymore. Not just about mourning the man she'd loved for a lifetime. This was about war, a quiet war, and she had just been handed the playbook. Evelyn stood. Her hands were still shaking, but her spine was straight. Her eyes were clear. She walked to the bedroom, their bedroom, and opened the bottom drawer of Thomas's nightstand. The file folder was still there. Receipts, bank forms, documents bearing a signature she now recognized as forged hers. Jason had already started, but Thomas had been a step ahead. She returned to the study, placed the contents of the box into a small fireproof satchel she'd kept hidden since her nursing days, and zipped it shut, tucked it under her coat. Then she reached for the photograph, the one of them smiling in front of the porch. Her fingers traced the edges. She whispered a quiet thank you to the air, to the silence, to the ghost of a man who had loved her enough to protect her, even after death. She didn't cry again. There would be time for tears later. Now there was work to do, and Evelyn Carter was ready. The next morning, Evelyn sat across from a man she hadn't seen in almost 10 years. Harold Dunn had aged not gracefully, not entirely, but with a certain dignified wear. His once black hair was now mostly snow-white, but his frame was still straight, and his handshake still firm. His office hadn't changed either. Dark paneled walls, leather chairs that creaked when you shifted. Diplomas lined up like shields across the back wall. But it was the photograph behind his desk that caught her eye, Thomas laughing, holding up a fishing rod with Harold by his side. Evelyn stared at it longer than she meant to. Harold followed her gaze and smiled faintly. "That was summer '92. We almost drowned in that canoe, remember?" Evelyn gave a soft exhale. "Thomas came home swearing you were the worst fisherman alive." Harold chuckled. "I probably was." Then silence. The smile faded from his lips. "You found the box," he said quietly. Evelyn nodded. "And the journal, the flash drive, his letter." Harold leaned forward. "Do you understand what you have?" "Yes," she said, "and I want to use it." He reached for the manila envelope she'd slid across the desk. He opened it slowly, pulled out the documents. Trust paperwork, deed to the cottage, itemized account records, notarized letters. "Your husband was meticulous," he murmured. "He was building a firewall around you, quietly, deliberately. I helped him structure the trust under a sub-entity of your maiden name with indirect banking channels. He didn't want Jason anywhere near it." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "He's already been falsifying documents, hasn't he?" Harold looked up. "Yes." He walked over to a locked cabinet and pulled out a folder marked Carter Estate Secondary Files. When he returned, he placed it gently between them. These were faxed to my office 3 days after Thomas's funeral. From Jason. He posed as your legal proxy, claimed you had declined estate responsibilities due to mental instability, that you were unfit to manage finances, signed with your name this signature here. He pointed. It's not even a good forgery. Evelyn stared at the signature. It was her name, yes, but the loop in the Y was too tight. The slant was wrong. The E lacked weight. She didn't speak for several seconds. Then I want to file charges. Harold nodded. We'll start with revocation of fiduciary power, then proceed with elder financial exploitation and civil fraud. I'll coordinate with the probate court, get an injunction filed to freeze any accounts he's accessed. I want him investigated. He will be. Evelyn exhaled slowly, deeply. She could feel the shift inside her like steel plates moving beneath the surface of a long-buried fault line. For months she'd been weathering the tremors. Now she was the quake. Harold slid over a fresh document. You'll need to sign the formal complaint. Once filed, it'll trigger an inquiry. Depending on the judge, Jason and Melanie could be subpoenaed within a week. Evelyn picked up the pen. She paused. For a moment she thought of Jason at age 5, a paper crown on his head, frosting on his cheek, giggling as she carried in his birthday cake. She thought of his first sleepover, the night he had a fever and clung to her shirt whimpering like a baby bird. She thought of the last time he hugged her years ago, brief and distracted like a duty to be performed. Then she signed, in bold ink, with a hand that didn't shake. Harold pressed the file closed. I'll take care of the rest. You focus on staying quiet. Evelyn tilted her head. Quiet, he nodded. Jason can't know you've activated the trust. Let him believe you're still in the dark. Let him move freely. The more he moves, the deeper he'll dig the hole himself. I assume he'll be arrogant. He'll be worse, Harold said. He'll be celebratory. He wasn't wrong. That night, Jason and Melanie hosted a dinner party. They called it an early victory celebration. Their words, not anyone else's. The wine flowed freely. Friends gathered around the granite kitchen island in the very house Thomas built with his own 2 hands. Melanie wore white, a silk dress slit to the thigh. Jason wore a navy button-down sleeves rolled just enough to look effortless. They toasted new beginnings, financial freedom, and finally building a future without limits. I spoke with the agent this morning, Melanie told the room. She says the rezoning will be approved by summer. We'll triple our return on the sale. Jason grinned. And Mom's comfortable. We made sure she's taken care of. The guests applauded. A man from Jason's firm leaned in. You really think she'll stay quiet? I mean, no offense, but she always seemed sharp. Jason waved a hand. She's in a facility with limited phone privileges. The administrator thinks she's grieving too hard to handle financial decisions. We've got 6 months before any red tape even sniffs the paperwork. Melanie sipped her Chardonnay. Besides, the house is already in escrow. She'd have to lawyer up and move heaven and earth just to catch up to where we are. Jason raised his glass. To efficient inheritance. They clinked glasses. Outside the dining room window, thunder rolled over the hills. Inside, laughter echoed through the house. And not one of them noticed the envelope slid under the door later that evening by a silent courier in a black car with no plates. Inside the envelope, a subpoena, addressed to Jason Carter, stamped with the seal of Superior Court Elder Financial Protection Division. They wouldn't see it until morning. But by then the match had already been struck. The fire had already begun. Back in the quiet of her temporary rental, a small apartment above the local florist where Harold had arranged for her to stay, Evelyn sat at the dining table alone, reviewing the trust documents Thomas had built. There were sections she didn't understand legalese that made her eyes burn, but the intentions were clear. He'd seen the danger. He'd prepared. And now she was walking the path he left for her. There was no sadness in her tonight, no mourning, no grief, only resolve. She stared at the copy of the complaint form Harold had given her for her records, her name printed at the top, Evelyn M. Carter, plaintiff. She smiled. She hadn't seen her name on a legal document in decades. Not since she co-signed Jason's college loans. Not since she signed the deed to this house they'd tried to steal. But this time she wasn't co-signing anyone's future. She was writing her own, and the ink was permanent. The manila envelope arrived at 8:12 a.m., delivered by a stone-faced clerk in a gray suit who didn't wait for a signature. Jason Carter opened the front door in a silk robe, nursing a hangover and a half-finished cup of coffee. When he saw the court seal, his stomach dropped before his mind could catch up. "Mel," he shouted, "get in here." Melanie appeared seconds later in yoga pants and a cashmere hoodie, hair still damp from her shower. "What?" He tossed the envelope onto the kitchen counter like it burned his hands. "Read it." She slit the edge open with a butter knife and pulled out the contents. Her lips moved as she read, her brows creased, and then her face drained of color. "Investigation for fraudulent signature," she murmured. "Misuse of power of attorney. Exploitation of a dependent adult." "Oh my God, Jason." He grabbed the pages, scanned them again as if a second read would change their meaning. "This has to be a mistake. It's signed by a judge." "Then it's a setup." Her voice sharpened. "This is from your mother's lawyer." Jason turned away, pacing. "Harold Dunn. That old buzzard. I knew he'd try something." Melanie's voice quivered. "They know you forged her signature." Jason froze. The words hung in the air like a dropped knife. I didn't." Melanie stepped back from him. "Don't lie to me right now." Jason's hands trembled as he braced himself on the counter. "This doesn't mean anything. We can fix it. We just need to get ahead of it. And how exactly do we do that?" Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. They both stiffened. Jason peeked through the curtain, then stiffened again. He stepped back. "It's her." Melanie blinked. "Who?" He swallowed. "My mother." Melanie's face twisted in confusion. "She's supposed to be in the facility." Jason didn't answer. He didn't move. The bell rang again, this time slower, more deliberate. Evelyn stood on the front porch in a long black coat, her umbrella folded at her side, water dripping from her collar. Her posture was straight, her eyes unreadable. When Jason opened the door, the silence between them was louder than the rain behind her. "Hi, sweetheart," Evelyn said softly. "May I come in?" Jason hesitated for one fraction of a second too long, then stepped aside. Melanie stood behind him, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line. Evelyn walked inside slowly, glancing at the staircase, the marble floors, the place that used to be her home. She stopped in the middle of the living room, took off her coat, and folded it neatly over her arm. "No hugs?" she asked quietly. "No coffee?" Jason exhaled through his nose. "Let's not play games." She turned to him, her voice still calm. "You're right. Let's not." Melanie's voice came from behind him. "You're not supposed to be here." Evelyn looked at her. "Why?" "Because it disrupts the narrative where I'm too senile to make legal decisions." Melanie looked away. Evelyn turned back to Jason. "You filed false paperwork under my name. You forged my signature. You accessed accounts that never belonged to you." Jason's jaw tightened. "You left everything to Dad, which means everything defaults to me." "That's not how trusts work," Evelyn said coldly. "And you know it." He took a step forward, his voice raising. "Why are you doing this? You've been living alone in that apartment, chasing ghosts. I was trying to make sure you were comfortable." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "Comfortable? Is that what you call Meadow Pines, that mildew-scented prison with shared bathrooms and no heat after 9 p.m.? He flinched. She saw it, but she didn't stop. "You dumped me there like an old appliance you didn't know how to recycle." "I didn't." "Yes, you did." Her voice was sharp now, clear, cold. "You and your lovely wife decided I was in the way. You thought you'd wait until the ground over your father's grave was cold before you took the rest." Melanie stepped forward. "You're being dramatic. We only did what was necessary. That house is too much for one person." "This is not about space," Evelyn snapped. "This is about greed. Don't insult me with your wellness community pitch when we both know you were already meeting with realtors behind my back." Jason folded his arms. "So what now? You sue us, drag your own family through court." Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a small speaker, a weathered portable cassette player. She clicked it on, and Thomas's voice filled the room. "If you're listening, Evelyn, I'm sorry. I tried to stop them." Jason's face paled. Melanie's hand went to her mouth. "They want the estate, and they want you gone. But I protected what I could." Evelyn let it play. Let them hear every word, every syllable of their betrayal narrated by a dead man who had seen it all coming. When it ended, the room was silent. Jason's fists were clenched. Melanie was visibly shaking. "You recorded him?" Jason asked hoarsely. "No," Evelyn said. He recorded himself, because he knew neither of you would have the decency to stop before you crossed the line. Jason turned away, grabbed his glass from the bar, and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the fireplace. Melanie gasped. "Your own son," he said, breathing hard, "and you come here like you're the righteous one." "You're not a son," Evelyn said, voice flat. "You're a thief in a tailored suit. You stole Time Trust, and now you're trying to steal blood. I was the only one who stayed. The only one who didn't leave this family behind." "No," she said, stepping forward. "You stayed because you thought there'd be something left for you to take." Melanie dropped onto the couch, her head in her hands, sobbing silently. Evelyn looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment a trace of pity flickered. But only for a moment, because Melanie had stood beside him in every step. "Get out," Jason said suddenly. "Leave now." "I will," Evelyn replied. "But not before you understand one thing." She stepped close enough to see the sweat forming on his brow. "I'm not some fragile old woman you can bully out of her life. I carried you in my body, gave you my name, taught you to walk, and paid for your college when you flunked out the first time. And now, I'm taking it back. All of it." Jason didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. Evelyn walked towards the door, pulled on her coat, and turned back one last time. The light from the chandelier cast shadows across her face. Her eyes were hard, unmoving. "You'll hear from my lawyer again tomorrow." And with that she stepped out into the rain, not retreating, not broken, but walking tall into the storm. She had unleashed a storm born not of revenge, but of justice finally unburied. It didn't take long for the machine to turn. By the end of the week, Evelyn's case had made its way through the probate court's fast-track system for elder exploitation. Within 72 hours of her confrontation with Jason and Melanie, a judge issued an emergency order freezing all joint financial accounts, property holdings, and pending transactions tied to the Carter estate. Jason Carter's face went pale as he read the notice served to his office downtown. Melanie answered the door of their home that afternoon to 2 uniformed officers and a plainclothes financial crimes investigator. The moment the word fraud left the agent's mouth, the last of the confidence drained from her posture, like someone had pulled the bones out of her frame. Jason wasn't arrested, not yet, but he was escorted downtown for formal questioning. So was she. Their phones were confiscated, their email records subpoenaed. Every transaction over the last 6 months was placed under review. It unraveled quickly from there. Melanie's real estate license was suspended pending an ethics review. Her business partners began pulling out of deals like rats escaping a sinking yacht. The luxury SUV she drove, leased under Evelyn's name, was repossessed in broad daylight in front of their friends at brunch. Jason's company quietly began distancing themselves from him, stripping his name from the firm's executive board tab on the website. One senior partner called his behavior regrettable, another called it unforgivable. But worse than the legal blow was the media. It began with a headline on a small local blog: "Wealthy couple accused of exploiting elderly mother for estate control." Within hours, regional news stations picked it up. By morning, it was national. Photos of Jason in a tailored navy suit, Melanie in a champagne gown smiling beside Evelyn in her funeral black, all plastered across screens with biting captions. "Son forces grieving widow into low-cost home to steal property." "Elder abuse investigation targets power couple." Talk show hosts chewed on the story like wolves. Who does that to their own mother? Honestly, they look the part. You can always tell when the veneers are just for show. They said she was mentally unfit. She just filed a 60-page complaint with 11 exhibits. Sounds pretty lucid to me. And through it all, Evelyn said nothing. No interviews, no public statements, no revenge post on social media, not even a quote for the press. She had already said everything that mattered. In one letter, Jason came home late that night after his second interview with the Financial Crimes Division. He looked like a ghost suit, wrinkled shirt, unbuttoned tie dangling from his pocket. Melanie was sitting on the staircase in silence, mascara staining her cheek like a smudge of ash. He walked past her without a word, and that's when he saw it. The front door was slightly ajar, no lights on. The house was too quiet. He stepped into the living room. The fireplace was off, the table cleared, the photos gone. On the kitchen island sat a small brass key and a note. He picked it up with numb fingers. "I've gone to find myself. You two can deal with the wreckage, E." He stared at it for a long time. Melanie approached from behind. "What is it?" He handed it to her wordlessly. She read it once, then again, and then she sat down on the cold tile floor and began to cry. This time Jason didn't try to stop her. He just looked around the empty house. The polished marble, the crown molding the wine fridge he'd once insisted they needed, and realized that somehow, without even raising her voice, his mother had taken everything with her. Not the money, not the house, the dignity, the story, the power. She was gone, and the silence she left behind was louder than all their parties combined. 4 weeks later, in a quiet seaside town along the Pacific coast, an old bakery reopened under a new name, The Second Bloom. The sign was hand-painted in soft cream and coral. The window boxes overflowed with lavender and wild daisies. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon nutmeg and something deeper, something like home. Evelyn stood behind the counter in a navy apron, her silver hair pulled back, her hands steady. She poured coffee with the precision of a nurse. She served warm biscuits with the grace of a host. And when people lingered at the tables too long staring out at the sea, she let them. No one was rushed here. No one was forgotten. Each table held a small card that read, "Everyone deserves a second bloom. Take your time." She'd purchased the building in cash after Harold helped her move the funds from the protected trust. No loans, no sponsors, just quiet independence, brick by brick. The place was small, but it was hers. A local paper did a feature on her in their Hidden Gems column. They called her the Coffee Widow, an elegant woman who made magic from nothing and never asked for credit. Evelyn didn't correct them, let them have their story. She had already lived the real one. At night after closing, she'd sit on the small porch behind the cafe, a cup of chamomile in her hands, and watch the moon rise over the water. She thought of Thomas often, of the box under the step, of the voice on the tape. But more than that, she thought of who she'd become. Not someone who escaped, but someone who reclaimed. She wasn't the broken widow anymore. She wasn't the discarded mother. She was the author of a new chapter. A woman who had walked through betrayal and come out the other side holding something far more valuable than money. Herself. She watched the tide come in steady and certain and whispered into the salt air, "I'm home." Morning arrived like a promise. It spilled golden through the wide bay windows of the Second Bloom, catching the edges of hand-glazed mugs and the gentle curves of glass jars filled with cinnamon sticks and peppermint bark. Outside, the sea whispered against the coast, its steady rhythm a lullaby Evelyn Carter had come to cherish. The cafe opened each day at 7:30 sharp. Evelyn would flip the wooden welcome sign, unbolt the old door, and begin brewing coffee, the strong kind, rich and dark, just the way Thomas liked it. The regulars came in waves. A retired professor named Al, who always brought a crossword puzzle and asked for whatever's fresh. A former librarian named Diane, who stayed for hours with chamomile and Agatha Christie paperbacks. A quiet man who never gave his name, only a nod, but left generous tips folded inside newspaper clippings of world events. And then there were the women, older women, alone sometimes, but not always. They came quietly at first, sat near the windows, sipped slowly, listened, watched. Some stayed, others returned the next day and the next. Evelyn began to notice a pattern, the way they paused at the register, eyes lingering not on the menu, but on her. The way their shoulders softened once they stepped inside, like they'd been holding their breath for years. It wasn't just a cafe. It was a refuge, a harbor. And whether they realized it or not, they were all survivors of something. Some wore it like armor, others carried it like dust in their pockets. But Evelyn saw it in them because it was the same thing she saw in the mirror every morning. The quiet ache of being discarded, overlooked, written out of your own story by people who called it love. She knew that ache intimately, and now she was offering something else in return. Not pity, not rescue, but space. One Tuesday afternoon, the bell above the door jingled, and Evelyn looked up from her honey lemon tray to see Martha standing there holding a bag of oranges and grinning like the devil. "Well, well," Martha said, "look at you." Evelyn smiled. "Took you long enough." Martha walked in without waiting for permission, dropped the oranges on the counter, and pulled Evelyn into a tight hug. "Place smells like heaven," she murmured. "Smells like cinnamon and burnt pride." Same difference. They laughed. It felt good. Later that evening, after the cafe had closed and the tea urns were empty, they sat outside on the small patio, wrapped in shawls, sipping spiced cider as the waves licked at the rocks. "You made something here," Martha said, quietly looking around. "Something real." Evelyn watched the steam curl from her mug. "I just wanted to create the place I needed when it all went dark." "Well," Martha said, reaching into her tote bag, "then you'll need this." She pulled out a small wooden sign, handcrafted and varnished. The edges were carved with delicate vines, and in the center in warm lettering it read, "Evelyn's Corner." Evelyn blinked. "I had it made by a man in town," Martha said. "Used to carve headboards. He owed me a favor." Evelyn traced the letters with her fingertips. She didn't speak for a long time, but when she finally did, her voice cracked just slightly. "It's beautiful. It's yours. Hang it wherever you want." They sat in silence again, watching the light fade from the sky. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was the silence of women who had earned the right not to fill it. Later that week, Evelyn mounted the sign above a small bookshelf near the front of the cafe, where she kept a curated collection of donated paperbacks, forgotten postcards, and a collection of journals for patrons to write in. Underneath the sign was a little card that read, "Everyone has a corner in this world. This one's mine. What's yours?" Soon people began leaving notes, on napkins, on receipts, folded into books and tucked behind salt shakers. Some were brief. "He left me for her, but I'm still here. My daughter hasn't called in 8 years. I still bake her favorite bread." Others were long, entire letters. One woman wrote 4 pages about the time she escaped her abusive marriage in her 70s and started hiking every morning just to feel her legs again. Evelyn read each one after closing time, alone by the fire with a cup of green tea and the windows open to the ocean air. She never judged, never pitied, only nodded softly and whispered, "I see you." One morning a letter arrived, no return address, just her name written in block letters. Inside, "Dear Evelyn, I visited your cafe last Sunday. I didn't introduce myself. I sat near the window. You brought me lavender tea and a warm scone, and you smiled at me like you meant it. I cried all the way home. My son hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. My daughter only texts when she wants money. I used to think I was invisible, but you looked right at me. I just wanted to say thank you. For the tea, for the warmth, for the reminder that I still exist. Please don't stop. Marjorie, table 4. Evelyn folded the letter, pressed it gently to her chest, and closed her eyes. It wasn't grand. It wasn't flashy. But this was impact. This was restoration. And it was far more powerful than any courtroom gavel or press headline. It was the slow, steady stitching together of women who had been unraveled. Music began to fill the cafe once a week. A local guitarist named Frank volunteered to play folk songs on Saturdays. Diane, the retired librarian, started a book club that met twice a month and always devolved into laughter and pastries. Martha ran a discussion group called the Silver Chapter, where women shared stories they were told not to talk about: divorce, betrayal, disappointment, and rediscovery. People started calling it a healing cafe, a sanctuary. But to Evelyn, it was just what Thomas had meant it to be all along, a second chance. Not just for her, but for anyone who stepped inside with nothing left but hope and a heartbeat. She stood behind the counter one morning as sunlight poured in and the bell jingled again. A new face, an older woman, elegant with tired eyes and a designer purse clutched like a lifeline. She looked around. Then without a word, she sat at the window. Evelyn smiled, poured coffee, and crossed the room to greet her. "Welcome," she said softly. "Take your time." Because that's what the second bloom was built on: time and truth, and the knowledge that sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do after being broken is open the door, pour a cup of coffee, and start again. One bloom at a time. It was a Thursday morning when the doorbell chimed differently. Evelyn Carter had come to know the sound of each visitor, the hesitant jingle of someone who didn't know what they were looking for, the hurried rattle of the local mailman, the rhythmic arrival of regulars like Diane or Martha. But this sound, it was softer, lighter, a breath before a question. She looked up from the register, wiping her hands on her apron. A young woman stood in the doorway, mid-20s maybe. Soft honey blonde hair pulled into a messy braid, a plain navy cardigan over a floral blouse. Her jeans were torn, not the fashionable kind, but the kind that came from walking more than you could afford to drive. Her eyes were the first thing Evelyn noticed, gray like Thomas's, but sharper, younger, searching. The woman didn't step forward, she just stood there uncertain. Evelyn smiled gently. "Come in, sweetheart, we don't bite." The woman blinked, startled, then nodded and walked inside. She moved like someone unsure of the ground beneath her feet. She glanced around at the cafe's wooden shelves, the old photographs on the wall, the hand-carved sign that read, "Evelyn's Corner." Then she turned to the counter and said very quietly, "I think I'm your granddaughter." Time stopped, not in the dramatic cinematic sense. There were still plates clinking in the kitchen, the drip of the coffee machine, the soft instrumental guitar playing overhead. But inside Evelyn something ruptured and went completely, utterly still. She stared. The girl swallowed. "My name is Emma. Emma Carter. I'm 25. The name hit like a wind through a closed window. Emma. She'd never heard it before, not once. Evelyn took a breath, gripping the countertop. "Jason never told me. I don't think he wanted you to know," Emma said, voice cracking slightly. "He and my birth mother gave me up for adoption when I was 2. I don't remember them. I found out last year after I took a DNA test for fun. That led to some records and eventually to him." Evelyn felt herself sitting down without remembering how she got to the stool. Emma continued, her fingers fiddling with the strap of her bag. "I met him once, in a coffee shop. He was polite, cold, told me I was better off staying out of things, that you were complicated." Evelyn almost laughed at that. Emma bit her lip. I didn't want to make trouble, but I wanted to know who you are, what happened, and if," her voice trailed off, "if there's any part of me that belongs to something." Silence followed, and then Evelyn did the only thing that made sense. She stood, walked around the counter, and opened her arms. Emma stepped into them with a shudder. The hug wasn't elegant, it wasn't choreographed, it was messy, tight, raw. It was a woman who thought her family line had ended, finding a thread that had quietly survived. They stayed like that for a long time. Finally, Evelyn whispered into her granddaughter's hair, "You are the brightest thing this family has ever done. You're the light we thought we'd lost." Emma clung tighter. They sat near the window after that, 2 mugs of jasmine tea steaming between them. Evelyn told her the story not all at once, but in the slow, steady way survivors speak when they finally find someone who can hold the weight. She spoke of Thomas, of the trust, of the betrayal, of the box beneath the step. Emma listened without interrupting. Her eyes filled at parts, hardened at others. When Evelyn reached the part about the cafe and starting over, Emma looked around the shop again like it was something holy. "I want to stay," she said softly. Evelyn blinked. "You don't have to." "I know," Emma interrupted, "but I want to. I've never felt peace like this." Evelyn studied her face. There was a tremble there. Not fear, but something deeper, like a chord that had finally stopped vibrating. "You can stay in the loft upstairs," Evelyn said, her voice breaking. "It used to be a storage space, but I've been thinking of fixing it up." Emma smiled. "We can fix it together." That weekend they cleaned the loft. It was dusty, full of old crates and forgotten linen, but the bones were strong. Emma painted while Evelyn built shelves. They laughed about Evelyn's hammering skills and Emma's inability to fold a fitted sheet. On Sunday morning, Evelyn brought up a tray of coffee and warm almond scones. Emma was sitting cross-legged on the floor writing in a journal. "What are you writing?" Evelyn asked. Emma held it up shyly. On the cover, she'd written "The Women Who Stayed." "It's not just about you," she said. "It's about all the women who've been left behind, but found a way to bloom again." Evelyn's throat tightened. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, silver simple with a pale blue stone. Thomas had given it to her the day Jason was born. She handed it to Emma. "This belongs to you now." Emma held it in her palm like it was made of breath. That night they drank chamomile tea on the porch. The wind from the sea brushed against their cheeks. Above them, the stars stretched long and quiet. Emma leaned her head on Evelyn's shoulder. "You're not what he said," she whispered. Evelyn smiled. "No one ever is." They sat in silence, 2 generations of survival finally stitching their stories together, not with anger, but with warmth, and the undeniable pull of blood that had waited too long to recognize itself. Justice didn't come with flashing lights or gavel-pounding dramatics. It came quietly, in a courtroom that smelled faintly of varnish and old leather. where fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the air conditioning was too cold. Where Evelyn sat in the second row, dressed in a gray shawl and her wedding ring turned inward, watching the son she once sang lullabies to as he stood before a federal judge in a tailored suit and handcuffs. Jason's face was pale, but not remorseful. Melanie sat beside him, head bowed, not crying, only trembling slightly like a leaf that had finally realized winter was permanent. The prosecution was swift. Forgery, abuse of fiduciary responsibility, financial exploitation of a dependent adult, a pattern of fraud built through testimony, bank records, and the unmistakable voice of Thomas Carter captured forever on tape. The courtroom was still when the sentence was read. 5 years. Both of them. No suspended sentence. No chance to vanish into the quiet affluence of lawyers and loopholes. Just time. Time to sit inside concrete and metal and think about what they'd done. Evelyn did not smile. She did not cheer. She only exhaled. Long and steady, the gavel dropped. The past was buried, and the future began. The Thomas Legacy Scholarship launched 3 months later. It was quiet at first, a single scholarship offering full tuition to one student over the age of 50, pursuing nursing, elder care, or social work. Funded entirely through the Carter Family Trust, managed by Evelyn and Harold. It grew faster than expected. Applications poured in. Letters from grandmothers, retired mechanics, single fathers who had cared for dying parents and wanted to turn grief into purpose. One woman wrote, "I spent 20 years watching over my husband with Parkinson's. I never knew I had more to give. This scholarship would let me become the nurse I wish we'd had." Evelyn read that one 3 times, eyes wet. The trust once built as a shield had become a lantern. It lit paths for people like her, those who thought their time had passed, those who needed only one person to believe in them. She sent acceptance letters on cream paper with handwritten notes, and every time she signed her name at the bottom she whispered, "This one's for you, Thomas." Meanwhile, the second bloom expanded not in square footage but in meaning. Emma, sharp and steady, took over much of the daily operations. She had a knack for order, streamlining inventory, curating playlists, organizing events. But her heart was with the people, and that's where she shined. She approached Evelyn one morning while prepping tea and said, "What if we started a life skills class?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "For who?" "For anyone over 65 who wants to learn again. Tech basics, writing their stories, how to advocate for themselves." Evelyn smiled slowly. "You want to build something bigger. I want to build what I needed when I had no one." Evelyn touched her granddaughter's cheek. "Then let's do it." The classes launched under the title Late Bloomers Academy. A few folding chairs, a borrowed projector, homemade cookies. But it worked, because it was real. They taught a 78-year-old how to FaceTime his great-granddaughter. They helped a woman write her first poem since 1963. They walked a man through the steps to open his first email account and watched him cry when he received a reply from his estranged brother. Lives shifted slowly, not because of grand gestures, but because someone cared enough to stay. One quiet morning, the sky was a pale peach, and the breeze was soft as breath. Evelyn stepped onto the porch in her worn gardening apron and her favorite slippers. The planter boxes were overflowing lavender, mint, and rosemary cascading in gentle waves. She held a watering can in one hand, a pair of shears in the other. She moved slowly, but with purpose. Every bloom was touched, every leaf tended. Inside, soft music played on the radio. Emma sat in the corner nook of the cafe, sunlight casting gold across her notebook. On her lap rested Thomas's old journal, its pages worn and ink faded but still legible. She read slowly, mouthing the words. One passage made her stop. "If I am gone and Evelyn ever reads this, tell her I never stopped believing in her strength, that she was never just someone's wife or someone's mother. She was the root, the trunk, the shelter." Emma blinked back tears and looked out toward the porch. There stood Evelyn. Her silver hair was glowing in the morning sun, her back straight, her eyes turned to the sky. The wind rustled the pages in Emma's lap. She rose, crossed to the porch, and stood beside her grandmother. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Evelyn reached out, rested her hand over Emma's, and then with a voice that was both steady and full of everything she had lived through, she whispered, "In the end, it was the betrayal that showed me the way home." The camera panned slowly, catching the sunlight spilling through the wooden beams above them. The sea hummed in the distance. Laughter echoed faintly from inside the cafe, and then fade to white. because some endings are not endings at all. They are beginnings, and the second bloom had only just begun.